good evening, good afternoon, good morning, wherever you are. We welcome you to another Spiritual Light. So I'll invite to the studio our dear friend Charles and our dear friend Silvia. Hello, Charles, Silvia.
Hello,
Welcome.
Moni. Hello, everyone. Very happy to be here with you again today.
Good, thank you. Happy to be with you too again. Today we'll be talking about, it's part 3 of the topics we've been talking about. And today is about euthanasia and assisted suicide. Hello, Silvia.
Hello there. Good evening, everyone. Good evening, Charles and Munir, once again to continue our conversations on this theme that's very important and is very much talked about nowadays. So it will be good to have the spiritist perspective on this subject. And so welcome everyone, and be with us. And if you feel like asking a question or something, do put a question through and we'll be able to try to answer it. So, boa tarde, bom dia a todos. E prazer estar com vocês novamente nesse dia. E esperamos que todos estejam bem. E nós vamos falar sobre um assunto muito importante, muito relevante nesse momento. E tentamos dar uma perspectiva espírita nesses assuntos. Então, bem-vindos, e se vocês quiserem fazer qualquer pergunta, põe a pergunta e a gente tenta responder. Bem-vindo a todos, e que Jesus os abençoe. Thank you.
I want to welcome Trevor O'Donnell, Sheila Gugelmin, and Elsa Rossi. Hello to you all. Thanks for being here with us. I found a definition of euthanasia and assisted suicide, so I'll read them for us, then we can start talking about the topic. As Silvia said, in the light of the Spiritist doctrine, then we can see it from a different perspective. So euthanasia, a doctor is allowed by law to end a person's life by a painless means as long as the person and their family agree. And assisted suicide, a doctor assists an individual in taking their own life if the person requests it. Then it has some subdivisions, voluntary and involuntary euthanasia, and some people also call orthanasia, when the equipment, life supporting equipment, is switched off, and then the life is allowed to take its natural course. And also we find it under different definitions. But voluntary euthanasia is when it is conducted with consent, whereas non-voluntary euthanasia is conducted on a person who is unable to consent due to their current health condition. So in this situation, the decision is made by another appropriate person. And also they, say that involuntary euthanasia is a crime, because it is against the will of the person, the permission, the consent of the person, or anyone responsible for that person. So I'll open then to listen to what Charles has to say about euthanasia.
Yes, so just to complement maybe a little bit the definitions, the origin of the name. Can you hear me?
Yes, yeah.
Yes, okay. The origin of the name is from the Greek eu, which means good, and thanatos, which means dead. So euthanasia means good death, generically. But the definition is, as you told, is the action to shorten the lifetime of a person which generally has incurable disease and who is condemned to die short term. And another distinction which we sometimes see is active euthanasia, which is when the doctor is injecting a product which is lethal, for which the people is dying, and the passive euthanasia, which is when we stop one treatment which is vital for the person, or even when we stop hydrating or the food for the people who cannot eat or drink by themselves is also another form of passive euthanasia, because we don't provide the care which is necessary for the person to survive if she cannot do it alone. So it's another form of active and passive euthanasia. And when we look to the different countries, the laws, there are some countries where euthanasia is allowed, even active euthanasia. This is, for instance, Belgium, Holland, Switzerland. There are other countries where the passive euthanasia is also allowed, so to suspend the treatment or the food or the hydration. This is including France and most of the countries in Europe. And there are also some other countries where the situation is not yet 100% clear. But basically, how to say, in most of the countries, the euthanasia is today in a certain way allowed by law. Okay. The problem is always, as we told for the suicide, as we told for the abortion, is the point of view. Because in the materialist paradigm, as usual, when someone is dying, then everything is finished and end of story and so on. So just helping the person to die earlier in order to finish everything earlier in their point of view. In the spiritualist point of view, the thing is a little bit more complicated, because euthanasia is the spirit which is leaving the body and then going back to the spiritual world. So in the spiritual paradigm, it's not the end of everything. For instance, if a person is suffering or having a disease which is incurable and so on, the fact to make euthanasia is somehow anticipating the separation of the spirit from his body. So in order to know if it's really which means good in Greek, if it's really a good way to go out in these cases where we have an incurable disease, the only way is to ask the spirits how it was. Did it help you or not? And that is exactly where the problem is, because when we ask the spirit who suffered an euthanasia, the big majority of them is either regretting the decisions they have taken to suffer an euthanasia or to commit an assisted suicide, or they are not happy because, again, the decision has been taken without their willing, because they could not give their opinion anymore at a given point in time, and so on. And most of them are saying, they claimed I was suffering, but I was not suffering. I would have liked to stay a little bit more to give a last bye-bye to my beloved ones and things like that. And most of them are coming with some regrets. And for them, it was not so good. It would have been better, which is a spiritist body of knowledge position, to, of course, do whatever we can to alleviate the sufferings, the pain, but to let not to shorten the life, not also to extend it by excess of therapy, which is totally useless, but to let the natural process follow its natural course. And that is, in fact, where we have the best feedback from the spirits which left the physical body and went back to the spiritual life. So this is what I wanted to add at this point in time.
Okay, thanks, Charles. And before we carry on, I just want to say hello to Lea Pimentel, Marco Davis, Giannini Rossi. Thanks for being here with us. And Silvia, we are looking forward to hearing what you have to say about euthanasia and assisted suicide as well.
You are on mute, Silvia.
Yeah.
Apologies, everyone. I personally find this subject extremely difficult because we are beginning to be in a situation that has become so clinical and so detached that I think a lot of people are losing their lives. And, in some of the things that are the way they said, the way the law is being done at the moment. And in doing some research for this, I was flabbergasted to see the number of countries that actually has already euthanasia approved as law. I couldn't believe that Spain is, Colombia, the others, I mean, Belgium and Holland. Holland was the first one, and Switzerland, of course. And Portugal. Portugal just voted for euthanasia. They're just waiting it to become law, but has already been voted and approved. And, I mean, those countries like Spain and Portugal used to be, and Colombia as well, used to be quite religious Catholic countries, and I was quite surprised. That this thing is sort of filtering through. Here in England, still euthanasia is suicide is against the law. They have, I think, if a daughter or anyone assisting someone to die could get 14 years in prison for that. And I do hope it continues. I think I think about these laws of euthanasia because has been quite a lot of campaigns to put things here to become law as well. But I think our queen, because she was such a religious person and such a high moral ground, I don't think directly, but I think she was a great influence, and I fear that now she's gone. If we can, so we hope our king, holds his ground as well, because being the head of the church, that would be important. So, I mean, there is many ways to think of that. And Charles mentioned a few things about spiritism and how the spirits come back later. And I think if a person decides to die because they are suffering or whatever it is, in a way we understand this. I mean, it's painful to say, but it's a suicide. And if they're being helped, then the person is killing them. In a way, to use the right word, it's a murdering the person. And I think it's so easy because, once the law comes in, very soon changes. And I think very much about Canada. In 2016, Canada voted for euthanasia to legalize assisted suicide and euthanasia by the Medical Association. They called the Medical Assistance of Dying. That's the name that they have there. And but it was for people who were in probably the last few days or the last weeks of their lives, and they had a terminal illness without absolutely any hope of recovering. And if they wanted to, they could be helped, assisted. And this was 2016, mind. In 2020, they changed it to include other illnesses, or someone maybe discovered they have multiple sclerosis or something and they don't want it to face, so they could go for this as well. But now they have just changed the law again, and from March 2024, the law of euthanasia assisted suicide in Canada will include people with mental illness. And I think a person who is mentally ill have absolutely no have absolutely no notion of accepting, signing documents to die, to be helped to die. I think they are very vulnerable part of the population. You know, I mean, mental illness by its very nature is extremely, make a person extremely vulnerable. And this, I think, is a terribly dangerous precedent on that. And of course, you know, once you have the law, and I think this, it's repeated in many places, and Holland as well, because originally in Holland was just for people who were terminally ill, and the same thing in Switzerland. And now, you know, Switzerland as well, they have places that you actually can go and choose to, and they give you something like to sleep, and the person holds the other part. And of course, once you fall asleep, their arm falls down and the anesthetic comes in, and 2 hours later they go to the body. So it's becoming so clinical and so detached from humanity. I don't know how I can express that. And I find this terrifying, because in Spiritism, we learn that life is the most precious gift that we have. We understand that the law of reincarnation, there are, I think, 3 times more spirit in the spiritual world trying to come back to this earth than there is here alive, incarnated at the moment. And I think the more interesting things are, you know, it's like Charles said, and like we're reading many things in the spiritist literature, that once the spirit goes and they realize, first of all, they haven't died, they're still more alive than ever, and they regret it. They regret it. I was talking to someone the other day. I read a book many, many, many years ago in Brazil. There's a very famous book, literature, by Julio Ribeiro. And this person, for one reason or another, he decided to kill himself, but he didn't want to suffer. He was an extremely intellectual man and very brilliant. So he decided to take the same thing that Socrates was forced to take, you know. And of course, as his body began to be paralyzed, he was found. He never expected to be found, but he was. And the torment that he went through, I mean, the way the writer actually described it, you know, you sort of, oh my God, please somebody wake him up. But he was completely aware, completely awake, but unable to say anything, to do anything, you know. And I must read this book when I was like 15, 16, and I still, the only thing I remember of the book is this, was that part. And I think this reflects very much when we read accounts from people, from the spirits, you know, who are giving messages, how once they were going through it, or once they've finished it, how painful it was for them to realize that they didn't really want to go. And so having all these things in a very clinical way, without someone to really talk to people, guide them and everything, it's very, very, it's painful and it's worrying. It's very concerning to me, and I'm sure for many people, because we also read in the many books of literature, you know, in Spiritist literature, Andrea Luiz, and I've just read something very recently that brought this to mind, more like in anything else, that this person was trying to commit suicide, but she was helped and she didn't. Eventually she had an accident and the spirit actually kept this person alive. You know, the body was practically dead, but they kept her alive because she needed to be alive a few more days, to be able to overcome quite a lot of the problems. So I think not only, I mean, physically they go, but the consequence for the spirit is unimaginable, you know. So it's something that we really needed to talk about and fight, because, you know, we're having all these discussions now. Brazil, now is also trying to have the law of abortion freed, and in so many countries, and now assisted suicide and euthanasia and all these sorts of things. So it's very worrying that mankind has lost, it seems, their way to God. They've lost their hope, and something, we need to do something about it. So I think having discussions like this, that we see the spiritual perspective, maybe hopefully we'll be able to help someone, so so far.
Thanks. So yes, it's very, very complicated when talking about suicide. We know that sometimes suicide is the result of psychological pain, but then we see that euthanasia is the result of physical pain in many cases. The lack of some hope, be of a physical recovery, or the change in your life that you bring back some peace of mind or whatever. And we see nowadays that the problem in my perception is that the value that we give to life is to be here for us to enjoy it. But if we don't have any enjoyment in life, then the best way out is actually through suicide or euthanasia or whatever. And Charles, in your opinion, what could the Spiritist doctrine provide to people that could give them a different perspective? For instance, the law of cause and effect, for the person to be undergoing that.
Mm-hmm. Of course, I mean, the main contribution of the Spiritist body of knowledge is the spiritualist paradigm. So changing from the materialist paradigm, then it's automatically the thinking, the reflections, the arguments are completely different. Okay, we change completely the point of view. And today, more and more, there are more and more evidences about that we have a soul. I'm sorry to repeat this every time and in almost every Wednesday. We have a soul. Our intelligence, our will is in this soul and not in our physical body. And when we die, it's just a separation of the soul from the physical body. So this is the main contribution of Spiritist body of knowledge. Second contribution is exactly as you told, Munir, understanding the reason of pain. Why do we suffer? So it is a very difficult question to answer. Okay, but when we think about, Léon Denis was really brilliant in writing about this subject of suffering. Almost everything suffers in the nature. And when we think about when everything is okay, we do not do efforts and we are not evolving so quick as when we have difficulties or when we have sufferings, which are stimulating us for evolving, for finding solution, for finding mitigation, and so on. And when we also understand the law of reincarnation, that we talked about it in this spiritual light several times now, reincarnation is also explaining if we do not know the origin of the suffering in the present life, it is because it comes from another life. And the suffering is some process of purification of our soul. The spirits are even saying the people who are suffering more than average, it is because they are reaching the last sufferings. They are finishing with the sufferings. So we need to understand not the suffering as something which is removing our dignity and so on. At the contrary, we could see the suffering as an opportunity. And another aspect of the suffering is as follows. There is a lot of people who have pain and do not suffer. And there are also a lot of people who, even though they have no pain, they are suffering. So the suffering is somehow a state of mind, is somehow something that in a certain way we can control. But of course, we need the help of the medicine. We need, for instance, the palliative cares, which is the best solution to have the best quality of life until the last moment. So we really, instead of doing euthanasia, we should prefer to do palliative cares. Of course, it may be a little bit more expensive, but this is giving the dignity of life to a lot of people. And then we also can think about what means dignity of life. Is dignity of life only to be young and healthy and whatever, and as soon as you have a little problem, the life is not, there is no dignity of life anymore? We can give a lot of examples. Look to Stephen Hawking. Did he have dignity of life or not? He had huge difficulties with this disease and so on. But look what he did. Look how many books he wrote. He even married in this situation. He ended up dying, of course. But does it mean because he had this big handicap, his life was not without dignity? Not at all. So we should really think about what really means the dignity of life. And another aspect that the Spiritist body of knowledge is also bringing is, if the death is a separation of our spirit from the physical body, the last moment of life can be extremely important. These last moments, the spirit, when he's already half, relieved from his body in the last moments, he thinks differently from the rest of his life. And being, when he has the opportunity to reflect, also to see the beloved one and so on, so many things which are extremely important of him can happen in these last moments, and which will help him a lot for the continuation of his evolution and for the next lives. And I have to say, unfortunately, my mother, she suffered this euthanasia process, which is between brackets legal in France, having sedatives and morphine at high doses at the end. So the process was introduced by my sisters, and then when I came, it was too late. Anyhow, she had only the blood analysis and the situation of the lung, respiratory collapse and so on. It was sure she would die very quick. But with the sedatives at high dose, she was not here anymore. These last moments that you can have from a person just before dying are completely paralyzed through this type of process. And luckily, we could get some news from her after her death. And she told, everything was much too quick. I was not suffering. I did not need all these things. And I would really have loved to be able to talk once more, a last time, with all of you, and so on and so on. So she regrets. And this was only several months later, because the first months she was somehow in a situation of trouble, because partly because she had Alzheimer's disease and things like that, but also partly because of this euthanasia process. So this is the example of my mother, but a lot of other spirits are saying the same. No, I did not want that. I regret, or some people who committed assisted suicide, if it would to be redone, I would not do it again, because they regret, because they saw the consequences on the spirit after the euthanasia process. So this is what we really have to think about and take more into account, because the best way is the palliative cares. And here in France, we can do directive anticipée, it's called in France. So it's anticipating directive or instructions for when these type of things happen with you. What do I want and what do I don't want? So there are two sections in the document. The first section is when you are still healthy. This is what I want, this is what I don't want. And there is a second section that you can complement in case you know you have an incurable disease. Do you still confirm your wish as when you were healthy? And in that document, I wrote very clearly, I don't know how the doctors who will read it, if they are materialistic, will interpret it. What I'm writing is, please let to my spirit the time to get out of his body. Don't push him out, don't kick him out. Let him the time to get detached from the spiritual body. And this is my will. So, of course, I don't want also artificial prolongation of life. I don't want this, in French, called acharnement thérapeutique. How do you tell that in English, Silvia? Heavy therapies to prolongate artificially the life uselessly. Basically, it's that. So I don't want that, but I don't want also to be kicked out of my body so quickly. And I even if I have to pay now, I will pay in order to have palliative cares, in order to make those moments as smooth as possible without needing having some more brutal way, like euthanasia, or even I also don't want, if I cannot drink or eat myself, I really don't want that the people let me die thirsty or without food. This is also something I don't think it is correct. I would not do it to anybody. So I also don't want to have it done by myself, on myself. So I'm sorry to give this example, but I think it illustrates the point of view of the spiritist body of knowledge. Don't shorten, don't extend, let the nature do it in naturally, and do whatever science can do to relieve, to betterment of quality of life, in palliative cares, in fighting against pain, helping you, helping the family, helping whatever, giving some oxygen when you need, or what, these type of things. And that is really the best way, the best, I would say, exit door from this life when this type of situation happens.
Wonderful, Charles. Anything you want to comment on that, Silvia?
Well, yes, there is the interesting thing. I think one of the points that Charles made that we read again and again, from News from Spirits when they give messages back, is that the last moment of life, it was important, was extremely important, was, they sort of realized the whole life in an instant, which can be completely different. The next incarnation can be a lot more relieved of a lot of problems and difficulties. I think so. That's why to have things go naturally. I think here in England as well, they sort of withdraw food and water, which I think is cruel. Is very cruel for a person who's already in pain, who's already, or they give them so much sedatives that they, and they do give them a lot of sedatives, so they don't need to, they don't drink, and it speeds up the process of dying as well, which the person dies in extremely discomfort, especially not having any water. I think is extremely cruel that. But also, I mean, to have the understanding, and it's in a way it's almost so, because we have, in one hand, medicine has so advanced, especially in the last 30 years. I mean, even 30 years ago, 40 years ago, if somebody had cancer, people go, they have treatments, and they overcome that, don't they? Most people survive now. The treatments, and it's much more advanced, and it could be a lot more advanced. And also, we have machines now. You have transplant of organs. You have a machine that will breathe for us, that do, and a lot of people are kept in machines for a long time, and the body is alive because the machines are keeping the body alive, but probably the spirit's not even there anymore. And in one side we have this, which sometimes the person is already, for all intents and purposes, is dead. It's just this machines keeping the body going. and they are not allowed to go. And some people who still have an opportunity to talk to their family, like Charles was saying, to saying goodbye, to saying maybe things that they're going through at that moment, and all the realization that they are getting the last few moments and things. They are not allowed to do that because this is forced. So we have this contradiction, in one way you want to keep people alive that really should be dead, and on the other we want people who should be alive, forcing them into death. It's a very strange things. I mean, you have, like sometimes babies who are born in situations that are absolutely, maybe suffering for them, and the parents go to court and they fight and they keep this child alive, and the child really is not alive because they are there's machine to breathe, machine to pump the heart, machine, and on the other hand, we want to speed up the process for others. So it's a bit contradictory. And I think in the point I think both of you made is a question of life. What value do we give to life? Because, some people, and if we go to countries that are poor, of course, they do have situation of suicides, of course, because it's an endemic. It's like pandemic, rather, but not as much as we have in the most advanced countries where we have better medical treatment and all sorts of things. And in one side, people fight so hard to be alive, don't they? When you think about the situation that just happened in Libya, all the people lost their homes, lost everything, but they are fighting. They are fighting on, and they lost loved ones. And we can't imagine the pain and the suffering they're going through. And I think a lot of people in Rio Grande do Sul as well, that they have this problem. Those people in Hawaii, also fighting the fires and flooding everywhere and things. And they fight so hard for life. And on the other hand, people throw away. And I think one of the things that concerns me as well is it's a question of putting this into law, facilitating things that should not be accepted, by the majority of people. And I think Charles made a point that is extremely important, because there are a lot of people who are healthy, and then either they have a disease or they had an accident, and they wanted to kill themselves. And I've never met Professor Hawking, but the interviews he gave, he could, in the last few years of his life, the only thing he could move was his eyebrows, and yet he wrote one of the most important theories, because he became ill at 22. The daughter did give him maybe 2-3 years life, but that, and he has, because he knew he wouldn't be able to use a pencil, write, he started learning how to calculate things, do the calculation in his head, and he went to this professor, I'm sorry, you're wrong, because you calculated this in the wrong, because he could do that. And yet he fought for his life. He wrote basic theories on black holes, and, sort of moved forward a lot of physics. I mean, you probably know about that, when you're being a physicist yourself. But, he left such a baggage of work that really, when you think about him, you think about the books he wrote, the theory that, he even came out and said, I made a mistake on something on the black holes that I said 30 years ago. And so you don't think about this, that poor man in a wheelchair. You think about the body of work that he left. And of course, we can't all be very great scientists or anything, but each one of us have some purpose. We have come to this life for a purpose, and we see as well in situations when, I remember some years ago, there was a plane accident and people died in the mountains. And to survive, they ate each other, which was crazy thing to happen. But that was the only way they could survive, and people did that. even though they afterwards they were psychologically very hurt about those things. So I think what I'm trying to say as well is that there is such a shift in our society. I think what Charles was saying as well, that, we wanted to be young, plastic surgeries and this thing and that thing. And you don't need to have all this cream skin, you have that cream and that operation. And sometimes you see people who have plastic surgeries that they become irrecognizable, because they do so much of it because they want to keep their young face. And because age, old age, wisdom is not valued anymore. From the moment that you stop working, you are made to feel useless because you're retired. And yet there are people who retire, they do great things, they go to courses, they learn languages, they run, they do all sorts of things, and they really are able to fulfill quite a lot of their dreams, go do painting. I think we talked about someone the other day who was 90 years old and he just had a medical degree because the dream of his life of being a doctor, and he wasn't able when he was young. So there is all this wisdom there, and we don't value it. And we need to value beauty, and everything is fine. Young, I think Emmanuel has something. He said the youth, young people, are very important. They are the future, but they don't have enough experience now. We need to help them. We need to guide them, for them to learn the things from experience, and for those who have gone by. You can't have just a young person. Now they don't have enough knowledge of life, experience. We needed to help and guide them. And I think we are sort of put so much emphasis in youth that we forget this part, whereas it's being part of almost every single culture, that the elders, were the people you would go to when you have problems. They were respected in the tribes, they were the people who guided. They had the wisdom, the experience of life. And I think that's one of the things we are losing, and we need to be aware of. And that also the most important thing, and I think Charles mentioned it, we have a soul. We are not the physical body that we are. We are just being here at the moment. This body is where we inhabiting for this period of time, but we are not this body. We are a spirit. We are soul, and we are a spirit that lives forever. Imagine you going through all this euthanasia stuff, and then you have to come back and in a body that you're not going to be able to move or anything, because you have to learn the lessons, because you are external. We live forever. A spirit is eternal. And this is a body that we are at the moment. It's like we live in this house now, but we're going to move to another house afterwards. And it's exactly what's happening. And I think if we have conscience of a spiritual life, that this is just a part, is a period of life, and that we are going to have to live again. And in this life, we are building. We are the architects of the life that we are having in the future. I think a lot of people would stop and think before they continue, trying to finish their lives in the here and now. So I think it's very important to think about that. We are eternal beings. We are not going to end when this body ends. So
Yes,
maybe I
I
talked
think it's
too
important.
much about
Yes, it's to see that we are here, but the important aspects of life are not here. They are everywhere elsewhere. So that whatever we go through here is, for a short period of time, and it involves experiences that we require to find ourselves in a better situation somewhere else.
Exactly.
Going through, I think it was the site of the National Institutes of Health in the United States, NIH, I found arguments for and against assisted suicide. And one of them called my attention because I think, I saw that, and I had that doubt during the pandemic, COVID-19. I'll explain in a minute. And this one they call slippery slope, where doctors start assisting suicide of terminally ill patients, no recovery. They are clearly on their way to, the death. But then slowly they turn into other situations where, people are not in that situation. And the doubt that I have is during the pandemic, we saw that there were limited number of intensive care beds. And sometimes you have someone there, is in a terrible situation. It's just a question of time. That person, will return to spirit. And then you have, young patients in slightly better situations, who are probably in a condition to fully recover in a shorter period of time. What to do in this situation? I want to hear both of you, in your opinion,
Well,
what to do.
that was a critical situation at the beginning of the pandemic
Yeah.
with intensive care units which were full. So it was very, very difficult, but the doctors and also the medical authorities had to make such decisions. And these decisions were generally made, how to say, in the best possible way they could, by, as you exactly told Munir, what is the remaining hope time of life? And of course, then they were selecting the patients which had, how to say, for which, given the investment for the reanimation, then at the end, the result is where the rest of life was longer. But sometimes there were some decisions which were very difficult. For instance, people above 80, no intensive care anymore, you see? And that was a little bit brutal decision. So, of course, I think the lessons learned from that is to find ways to increase the number of intensive cares beds. And it has been done, even in very short-term actions and so on. And I think these action plans and also all the restrictions we have suffered in France, the adjustment of the restriction, where exactly the occupation rate of the intensive care bed. So, of course, if you would ask my opinion, there is a young of 30 years and me with 60 years. I say, okay, let him go, and I will be at per God's will. I would take this decision myself, So, but of course, if they can have a place also for me, I think it would also be welcome, So these are the type of reasoning, and also I am accepting restriction not to go out, to put the mask or whatever, in order to reduce the probabilities that I need to occupy one of these places which are so in such scarcity. So this is things where we really have to think and do our own part as well. And unfortunately, some people just didn't care. They know, I don't want to put a mask, I don't want to put this, I don't want to put that. The vaccine is poison or whatever. And okay. So, but this is this type of situations where we really should see the interest of the collectivity much before our own interest or our own refusal of something, and be ready to do some sacrifices, to do some things, to soften a little bit some of our positions for the sake of the best, doing the best for the community, clearly.
Yeah, it's very interesting because you stop thinking in terms of individual, you start to think in terms of, a group. Who has the greater chance of surviving, And I think, in my view, is similar to what happens when you have to decide between the life of the mother and the life of the fetus.
Exactly.
One of them will survive. So who do you choose? And the spirits are adamant to say it's better to preserve the life is already ongoing than the one that is beginning. And I think we are at the other end now, talking about the other end.
Yeah.
Who will, stay here? Okay. Do you agree, Silvia?
Yes, yes, to a point. But a lot of the elderly people actually survived. Funnily enough, many died. I remember two people because whenever people survived, they would take them. And this elderly gentleman, I think he was 8 years old, and he didn't have all that. I mean, he had the treatment, but not all the. And he said to himself, "I am not going to die. This illness and not COVID is not going to kill me." And he said he put that in his mind throughout, and he actually survived. And there was another lady, she was 94, and she survived. And a lot of the young people, even though having all the treatment, they died. And we know as well that we have a time to be on this earth. And of course, I myself, I've lived through a lot of things. And if I have to choose someone who's 30 years old than me, I said, save him first. And this is something that is being done for many years. I mean, I remember during the war, I think in the thing of Pearl Harbor, a lot of the people, the ones who were worse, wounded worse, they wouldn't be treated. They would have treated the ones who had the chance of survival. So sometimes doctors need to do this. But I think also the doctors need to be really conscious of what they are doing, really seeing someone for what, no, this person will not survive because of the wounds they have or how bad they are. And this one has a chance. But they have to be really conscious of what they are doing, because if they might say, "Oh, I'm not going to treat that one, I'm going to prefer to treat this one," all those things come into play. But so if sometimes you can be elderly, but it's not your time to go, you need to be here. Sometimes a younger person is that time on earth has expired. We know that nothing escapes the power of God. We all have a time on earth. And I've read about this lady. She was on life support for 7 years, and her husband said to switch it off. He had been trying, because she had told him if she would ever get ill, she would never want to be on that. But her family, they had quite a lot of money, and they said no, she's going to be there. And so eventually, the doctor said, I mean, she's brain dead. She cannot survive. There's no point in keeping her anymore. It's her body. So eventually, they died. They disconnected everything, and she came back. They consider her brain dead, but she actually woke up once the machine had been taken off her. So, there is all such a thing that life will fight through. Some babies, they are almost dead, and they come, and life will always win. And we have a time on this. If it's our time to go, yes, then give space to somebody else, because that's a destiny, isn't it? We have a time here. We are going to go back, because our real life is in the spiritual world anyway. We are spirits, and we come back here because this is like a boarding school. I always think the earth is like a boarding school, and sometimes it's like Tom Brown school days. I don't know if you know that book, but it's horrendous. Some of those boarding schools in England used to be terrible. I remember someone, a lord or something, he got arrested for one thing or another. And the day of his trial, one of his colleagues, his old fellows from school, said, "Don't worry, it will not be as bad as Eton," because, people used to really suffer on those schools. But so, we need to make the best of what we have, live as much as we possibly can, and just let go when the time comes. Because holding on to a body as well, because we don't want to die, is a very sad thing, you know. So I think one point that Charles made, which I thought is extremely important: let nature take its course. You know, my time is come and goodbye, I go. Because sometimes euthanasia, especially if the person does not want it. I mean, there is at least one story in one of the books of Andre Luis, that this man wanted, he needed to do something because he felt bad about his wife and he wanted to see her. And, you know, he's practically was dead. And they actually injected him with something to die, and was extremely painful. He was, for a long, long time, the spirits couldn't reach him because, you know, his whole body was anesthetized for a long time. And so, you know, it's very, very difficult. Also, I remember once in a mediumship group that we would work, somebody came to give a message that the family said, oh, you know, she's suffering a lot. Let's, you know, let's give her something to ease the pain and things. And she said what their only intention was to get the money. They wanted the inheritance, you know. So she's there in the spiritual world, knowing exactly that the family, all this talk about easing her pain and making it better was just because they couldn't wait to get the money she had, you know. So get rid of your money to get rid of these people. But there are so many situations, but let life takes its course, whether it's COVID or, because a lot of young people, very strong, died of COVID, and a lot of elderly people remained alive, you know, and they still here and strong and everything. So the thing is, I think the message is life is precious. We, you know, we go to the doctors, we treat ourselves, we go to alternative, whatever. We do anything to be alive as long as we have to. And then, you know, just let go, because we going back to our home, to our friends, to our family who are there. And we're going to go back anyway. So might as well just go when it comes the time to go. So, you know.
Yeah, you said something important. Life is precious, and I think our duty is to do our best to, you know, live a good life up to the end. And the end, we don't know. It's programmed. It's been programmed. You know, it is in good hands. That's when faith is important. To believe that, you know, we won't go the day before there has been assigned, and the day after, if that is the plan. You know.
Yeah.
So
It's like somebody, sorry, it's very quickly, is that
no
somebody
problem.
said, you know, when they studied the Book of the Dead, you know, the Egyptians, they said, oh, the
Yeah.
Egyptians, they live to die. They live to die. Their whole life was a preparation, because they thought life was not here, somewhere else. They were going to go with their gods, you know, and they enjoyed life, you know. They invented beer. They had a really good life, the old Egyptians. But they were, when the time came, they're quite happy to go and let things, you know. So I think that's an important thing for us to learn.
Yeah. Live in this world without belonging to this world. You know?
Yeah,
Yeah.
like Jesus
So
overcome
I
the
want
world.
to thank the two of you very much indeed. It's been a great pleasure. And
Thank
I
you.
want just to hear a final message from Charles and then Silvia.
Yes, thank you. So for the opportunity, for being with us, for listening us. I hope we have brought some food for thoughts for you. Again, seeing the things through the spiritualist paradigm, which is now more and more appearing with accumulation of evidences to be the right one, in order to make the right decision at the right moment. For our good and for the good of our beloved ones. That's clear. So, as Silvia told, for some financial reasons or practical reasons, or occupying some room, or for cost, whatever, this really should not be the primary criteria for making this type of decisions. Life is precious, and there are solutions. So let's work in order to develop this solution of palliative care, for instance, as more as we can, in order to have this process, which, how to say, in order to help everyone, because this is something we are sure, with 100% probability, one day we will go to the other side. We will go back to the spiritual world. So it's really something to be thought about and to be organized seriously in order to make it the smoothest possible.
Thanks, Charles. Silvia?
Well, we just, we did this conversation. Maybe later on we can come back to it, because there is always something new, and it's very important. And if anyone out there listening to us, we're going to, and is feeling poorly and unhappy and depressed, have courage, take stock, like that poem, the Invictus, fight. And there is a poem as well by Dylan Thomas. They said, fight the dying of the night, when his father was dying, and he wrote that. And I always feel that it's so important for us, to fight the dying of the night, leave, and then, because if you need help, ask someone, there is a lot of support everywhere. So be firm, because death will come to all of us. It's inevitable, but live a life as well as you can while you're here. Enjoy every moment of it, because this is a gift. It's a God's gift to us, and we need to really enjoy it and see the beauty. And there is a song by George Harrison that he says, everything passes, everything must pass, and everything does. So, be a good cheer, everyone. And we're here, have your questions and everything. And thank you so much for being with us, Munir. It's been wonderful. And I hope you'll be with us again very, very soon. Thank you. And thank you, Charles, as well. It was really good.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you, Elsa, as well.
I just want to say thank you to Marco Davis. He's also been here with us, as usual. And to Cardiac Radio for allowing us to use their studio to,
and Elsa and Leia and everyone that was together with us today. God bless everyone.
God bless. See you next week for another spiritual light. God bless.
Okay, God bless. Bye.
Bye-bye.